The United States is known as a land of the free. The American character is rooted in independence, in thought, belief, and daily life. Yet the foundations of the American character are now under assault by groups that believe in changing not just the surface policies, but to also rewrite the history of this country, present new values to replace its traditions, and to reform even its foundation, the American Constitution. Under the narrative that some forms of speech and belief are dangerous,
Facebook's oversight board has decided to uphold the site's suspension of former President Donald Trump.
there's now a push to regulate speech and suppress belief. Under the narrative that America is too violent, there's a push to eliminate the rights of citizens to own firearms. And there are similar pushes being made to change the fabric of this country, down to a dismantling of its monuments and demonizing of its founding stories. Behind these narratives, however, are socialist movements and political groups that have misrepresented not just the history of this country, but even the very fabric of its system of government. The ideas that this country was founded on are now being warped and maligned to fit social agendas. America is more than just a nation. It represents an idea. And what would it mean for the world if that idea was lost? The American story was once seen as a message for the United States to promote. It was the idea that people, when given freedom, can create a prosperous and harmonious society. It was the shining city on the hill, with its message of freedom being an example for other nations to aspire towards.
And as we pray God, they always will, that another generation of Americans has protected and passed on lovingly this place called America, this shining city on a hill, this government of, by, and for the people.
The American story is now being attacked by groups and powers holding that freedom itself is a danger, and that government should more finely regulate the lives of each person to ensure social harmony. This conflict isn't new, however. It goes back to the time of America's founding, when the age of kings was coming to an end and people around the world were looking for what type of government could replace it, while finding the place of religion and tradition also in that new age. In 1776, the American founding fathers established one of these ideas, with a statement in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They established a government based on the idea that people's rights are given to them by God, and that government is only instituted among men to protect these rights. This led to the creation of one of the most prosperous nations in the history of the world, with its foundations in individual freedom.
They had such idealist ideas that when in the Declaration, when they said, you know, all men are created equal, and that's the assumption in the Constitution. It's very hard to believe that people anywhere else believe that. Not so much on race, but on class, whether they're Calvinistic, that if you're wealthy, you were either more devout or you were blessed by God, or your family genetically was, they didn't know much about genes, but they knew a lot what they call bloodline. So wealthy people were just superior people. But this idea that you were going to have land and anybody could come anywhere and become an American, that was a very radical idea.
The beauty of the Declaration of Independence is God used these flawed men to put together these amazing principles that ultimately, not only did they launch the greatest nation in the history of the world, but it was the Declaration principles that Abraham Lincoln would stand upon for the Emancipation Proclamation. It was the Declaration of Independence principles written by Thomas Jefferson all those years ago that the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. would march in the streets and recite over and over and over again.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So they put in place the formula, even though it took time, that ultimately then would produce the freest, most powerful, most benevolent nation in the history of the world.